Okay, I just realized that I forgot to hit the record button 10 minutes ago, so a quick intro. So what we're doing tonight is going over what to do when a piece of software is finished. So we made this little script here. It reads from a file and prints the words up there. Nothing fancy at all in this file. That's just a simplest case piece of software to look at. And we can go over here and double click this. This is about where we were. We have a logo, also drew a quick logo of a hand waving for this little world program to work in another example. So a finished piece of software ready to give to the users. But can we really trust our users not to come in and do that and mess up, get rid of that file? In which case our program just crashes. So if I undo that, bring that back in, we do have to have that file there. So we need an extra layer of protection. And when we go do what I just did there, use the graphics to navigate the File Explorer, go to the right directory, double click on something. What that really does is call some instructions in the background. Those clicks are just set up so that if I click in this spot, it runs a particular instruction on Windows 7, 8, 10, and 11. It's calling PowerShell, so we can do a PowerShell script. Out of habit, because I've been doing it for a while, I was going to do a batch script tonight. On a Linux system or a Mac, we would probably write a shell script. Macs do have a .command sort of file, which is Apple's proprietary version of a Unix shell script, but the majority of people just write the shell scripts exactly the same as they would for Linux to run on a Mac. But those, we can set up those instructions equivalent to going and clicking on this, and in that add a layer of protection where we make sure that this file is present. So I'll create a little batch script. Has everybody seen batch scripts before? So these are our command prompt instructions. So if I open command here, open command prompt, and we have all the instructions we could do from here, like, you could start Chrome and go to go somewhere over where we could check our email for class, or start Chrome and go over to YouTube. And click on search. Yeah, I was going to do a search, but we can run different instructions. Like in particular, for our case, we can start the Python interpreter. Or, and the point I was getting to, we list out the files that are here. There's our Python script. So when we click on it, what it really does is starts the Python interpreter and then passes it that script, main.py that we did, which reads from that text file, puts that into a string and prints those words out. A trivial piece of software, but once we have a piece of software, these other steps apply the same. We could start any piece of software that way. So really we need that instruction. We also need the we can add a layer of security by putting that in a script, by adding a selection structure to make sure that that file exists before we try to open it. So we can put those instructions into a file, and on Windows that's a batch file. So they usually almost always start with this line, echo all. What that does is it prevents every single thing, every single instruction that runs from coming back to the terminal. Because we don't need to see every single thing the computer does. We only want to see certain outputs. In this case, we only want to see the output from our Python script. Or for the simple case I had in mind this evening, we only want to see the error message if the file's not there. So I'll call this I'm going to name it like our app. So I'll call it software.bat, the batch file. And again, this was never mentioned in any of the classes that I took, any place where programming showed up. And when I was ready to do it, what I ended up having to do was go through a whole bunch of software and look around and then notice, like, okay, a whole lot of these things have a batch file. And when I dug deeper, it's like, okay, all those icons and start menus and stuff aren't calling the application, they're calling the batch file. They're starting the batch file, and then the application runs. And from digging through and looking at lots of pieces of software, I figured out the process. It made it a lot harder than it needed to be. Because we could just run that file. We saw that instruction, start the Python interpreter and run main.py, which is okay here because we are in the same directory. Obviously, we want to put the paths in there, probably relative addressing. If we put a whole big directory structure together for a large piece of software, our batch file might not be in the same place as the actual main script that's going to start things. So, and we don't know where it's going to be installed on the user's computer. So relative addressing would be a much better way to get around our own directory structure over to it. But you don't know how to do addressing. But wherever that's at, we can start the Python interpreter and call that. And that's all our batch file really needs to do. Just make sure it has the extension .bat. And if I switch to big pictures, you can see it gives us that icon, that do something icon, the gears, the settings things. People who spend a while on Windows machines know that that icon is going to do something when we click on it. So when we click on it, it runs that instruction, runs our program, which reads the words from the file, and then pauses, so we're ready to close it. So obviously, you'd probably do that on a much better piece of software, but at this point, we're still in that same boat. If the user deletes that data file, when they click on this, it just crashes. It tried to run, but all it did was immediately crash because it couldn't read the file. Control Z, bring that back. Now, as long as that file is there, we're okay. So the main thing we want our batch file to do is, before we do this, we want to make sure that file or any other resources that our software might depend on. By this point, you'll probably realize if we keep our resources nicely organized, there's probably going to be more than one file that our piece of software depends on. Make sure all of the scripts are in place, all the objects, everything we need. Some sort of selection structure, which in a batch file is, if exist is our keyword, then the name of the file, data file.txt, and then we use parentheses for a block of code. And this is important because I've forgotten this one a few times. The space there does matter. So that's these are command prompt instructions. So after the name of the file, the next thing is going to be space delimited, just like we would put in a command prompt. So having a space before those parentheses matters. And if that file is there, then we'll run this. Most of your text editors probably change a batch file. I don't know why Adam doesn't. That's a very, very common thing. But for some reason, it doesn't have Lexing in the text editor I'm using today. Then else, and a block of what to do if it's not there. And once again, remember, these are command prompt instructions. So that space, that having things space delimited does matter. Our keyword is else. Our keyword is not else parentheses. So space delimit things for command prompts and terminals and shells and all of that. Y'all have probably seen that before. I'll just echo something back. Echo critical file missing, software shutting down. And then I'll pause. It's a command prompt, so it has a pause built into it. So now if that file's there, it runs, no problem whatsoever. But if the user deletes that file, goes in there messing around with things or moves it, and it's somewhere where we can't find it, it gets a nice message that makes it look like it's shutting down gracefully. A critical file is missing, software shutting down, and the user knows they might need to reinstall it or something. So that's the first thing we want to do is instead of starting our software directly, make sure that it is safe to start it. Make sure all of the resources we need are there. You should probably check for that logo as well. And if you do it in a PS1 file, not PS1, a PowerShell script, it's a much more modern looking language. You all know how to do that in a Python script as well. So you could just check to see if a Python script's there and then use that Python script to check everything else. That would work. There's lots of ways to get instructions to a computer. We just want to make sure that it's safe to open our file instead of opening it directly. And then that is the one we were going to make a shortcut to. So if you have more options, create a shortcut. And then this shortcut, we can go in and change our icon things. No, not this icon. Real quick, convert theme to ICO online. This third one here, ICOconvert.com. I've been using this one for years. This is a good one to convert when we still, for those places we still need the ICO file. I think a lot of times we can use things and that it'll be fine, but just in case, grab that, just upload the picture and choose what type of ICO file you want. Probably a multi-size one. That's a lot easier because then you can do a whole bunch of sizes all in one thing, and it just takes a second to get that. So ICOconvert.com. I've been using this one for years. Just upload your picture, choose the size. It's easiest just to choose a whole bunch of sizes as one image. That way you have them all covered instead of having a bunch of different images. Something, then that can be used as your logo. Let's rename it because that did give it a weird name. Logo. We'll try that again. Icon. That way I can tell which one's which. Because obviously, if we're looking at the thumbnails, they're just two different image types, so we can see both of them. And now in that shortcut, zoom thumbnails right in the way. Get those out of the way. Under properties, we can browse over to, well, the same folder we're in. And choose that ICO file. There you go. So then that's the one we would want to have over on the desktop for them to click on. or in the start menu. The shortcut that starts the batch file to make sure everything's safe to start our software. Sort of like exception handling. And then we're ready to just copy and paste it onto the user's computer. But that's not really how we install software, right? I'll use Python for an example. I already have it here. Download Python. Somebody wants to install Python, so go over to Google, jump on here, and download the installer. Make sure they have the right one for Windows, Linux, or Mac, and download this exe file, an executable that isn't the software we actually want. This file is, when we run this, that puts the software we want on our computer. This one's an exe file, so that means it's going to pop up a little dialog box, a wizard that we click through and adjust any options. On Windows, we also have .msi files, which when we click on those, they just run. There's no options to change or anything. And that's what the user would expect, right? They wouldn't expect us to give them a bunch of files and say, copy and paste this on your computer. Linux users would, but Mac and Windows users would not. And I usually go ahead and make one of the installers for a Linux machine. There's a few of them out there. There are some that exist. Linux users probably want the tar zip file and have the source code themselves, because that's they're Linux users. But I usually go ahead and make one of the Linux type installers so that they know the software was tested on a Linux machine. So it's not even something I ever expect anybody to run, but it's like a little flag there. It's like, yes, this was tested on Linux. So download the source code from GitHub and you'll be fine to install it on your machine. But that's what the user expects. And we've talked about user expectations before, right? You really only have a couple seconds to convince people to use your software. We talked about that with the graphical user interfaces and making it look familiar, so that when people just look at it, they know what to do with it. Basically want them to know how to use your software, and that would include installing, which again, if you aren't familiar with it, an exe is a zipped folder. We can't unzip it. It's a special kind of zip folder. We can't unzip it and go in there. But what's inside there is a whole lot of batch files, a whole lot of command prompt instructions. So we need to write all of those command prompt instructions that we copy and paste our software onto their machine. And there's a lot of them, but there's also software that will do that for us. On a Windows machine, as far as the Windows installer, I have yet to find a piece of software that I'm really, really happy with. There's none that I'm, for the most part, there hasn't been very many that I'm just utterly displeased with. It's one of those things where they're all kind of about the same. One of those things where it looks like everybody that made it just looked at somebody else's as an example and didn't bother to change anything. So they all seem pretty much equivalent. I haven't found any that really just pop out on a Windows machine. On a Macs, I do have one that really that I have a big preference for. We'll look at that before we end up tonight, but it's sort of the same thing. It's a piece of software somebody wrote that we just tell it what our files are, and it puts together the installer for the end user. And then we can send them that. Well, the one I use on Macs is .pkg, the package file, instead of the image. When I was just going to use the same one I had last time. Like normal, we'd go to Google and search for software to create Windows installers. Should see if you list 4 great tools, 5 best, 17 best. think everybody in here has heard me recommend that before. You want to look at those lists. Those blogs, along with having the links to the software, well, if you read through that blog, you're also going to see the things you want to look for in that piece of software and get a good, might see some points you would have overlooked to begin with. Lately, I've been using on my last computer, I had install Forge, create a Windows exe installer. Let's see if this puts it up here or not. Yeah, talks about a few of those. So there's some of the same list. Installer. I did a quick search the other day, and it jumped right to the thing that I had last time. So I was just going to use that one again. If I see it here. Installer, I know. I'll just search for it. So on my last computer, from the last time I went through those best of lists, the one I ended up using was this thing called Install Forge. It's a free setup, free software. Basically just a GUI where we drag and drop a bunch of stuff, and then it will write all those command prompt instructions for the exe installer. And there's a lot of them. It's a very, very tedious, very, very time-consuming thing to write all of them. Started thinking about it, logically, it's not, doesn't seem like that much. We need to copy our files from the internet somewhere and put them on the other person's computer, create some start menu shortcuts and set icons, things like that. But it ends up being a whole lot of command prompt instructions that need typed. Those are just text files, right? We just looked at a batch file. That's just a text file. And we know computers write text files really, really quick. So when we get ready and run this software, if you haven't seen it before, it's going to surprise you how long it takes to actually write a couple of text files full of command prompt instructions to make the installer. Give you some idea of the time it's saving to have this software do it. So the normal, I'm going to click on that, run that. And it's an exe, so the exe installers get the wizards. If you would prefer an MSI installer, just throw that in the search and look for those best of lists. For Windows, I've been through it a few times and none of the software really stood out to me. They all seemed about equivalent, so they're all very, very similar. This one was installed on my last computer, so I thought I'd just use it again. It kind of worked. So walk through the wizard here, accept the agreement. Yeah, that's good. Sure, that's probably okay. Just want to put it. I don't want the desktop icon. I want the start menu folder. All right, it's ready. Launch. We're going to finish that. And now I should be able to launch it from over here somewhere. Install Forge. So here's what the little GUI looks like. It just over at the left, it looks like a bunch of tabs, but that's basically our steps. Instead of tabs across the top, they put them down the left to indicate it's a bunch of steps to do in this order. So some general information. What is the name of this? I'll call it example software. This is version 1.1. I'm making any typos when typing that. I probably made typos. 1.1.3. Speaking of typos, did you see the announcement from last night's class, Mark, about that? It was a little side note. It wasn't even the thing we were looking at, so we didn't take time to debug it. But when I realized what it was, I felt really silly for that typo. It's like, oh, that's what we're wrong. Those happen sometimes. We know about that. So that's what leads to those numbers being something other than version 1.0 release number 1. As we get typos and we might not catch them when we first release our software, so those numbers go up over time. Some sort of class name. Which one are we installing? I'll just click support all Windows. That'll work. The one thing we want to give it here is we need to make sure what language it's in. Make sure you choose at least one language. That's one of the minimum requirements. You have to say what language to do your installer in. And this user interface, this refers to the wizard. So you just keep it like it is. Notice that it's referring to something there in angle brackets. That's how the people who make this software refer to their variables. So main is referring to a variable that's something that's stored there. I don't think we put what that is yet. We'll get that in sort of the next tab. But that's referring to the wizard. We can change the image if we want to. Yes. If you want a particular image for the install wizard, not for your software once it's installed, then just put the path to that here. Go click on the ellipsis and browse to, you'll know how those buttons work. Click on that and go to where that image is. I guess I could do it here. We have something. We have an icon. Might as well use our logo. And notice that it only showed one of those two images and it showed the ping this time. So look at the ping. I'll use that for both of them. The wizard image is the one at the left. I was kind of thinking I was going to skip over this, but then I looked at the clock and I was like, oh, I'm about 10 minutes ahead of where I thought I was going to be. So I probably could have pointed this out when we got to the wizard. So the first screen in our wizard had some big picture over here. And the start button, or when we got to the end, it had that picture there and then the finish button. And the big picture over on that side was only on like the first and last dialogues in the wizard, but there was also a little picture up here. So the big one's the wizard picture and the little one's the header picture. It wouldn't take very many passes to figure out which one's which. Probably could have pointed at those when we were looking at a wizard just a moment ago. Might as well use our own logo though. So that's all of the general tab. And the next one is the setup. So this is important. What files do we want to add? Obviously, we want to add all the files from our application. So let's see, after this PC and documents and delete. On mine, yours might be somewhere different. I'm going to add this software folder. I'm going to add all the files in that. And make this a little smaller. Oh. Why is that not resizing? Make that smaller. I don't like whoever makes the decision in Windows that things can go in front of the taskbar or behind the taskbar and it would be perfectly okay. I don't agree with that decision. You have to resize things. So notice where it's installing it. Something called program files, then a folder called company, then a folder called app name. And up in the general thing, there's our app name and there's our company name. So that's where you got those variables for the file path. Obviously we can change that. We have control over it. That's why it's in a text box there. If you want the user to put it someplace different, check the box. That doesn't automatically put it somewhere different. That like gives the option. Right? Such as, there in the wizard a moment ago, I clicked one of the options to not create a desktop icon. So clicking the checkbox here only gives the option on the installer for that. So remember, all of this, your software is ready, should be in that folder that you upload. The rest of this is more detailed things. So the product name is going to be app name. We got the version. You can see some of those variables. You probably want to include an uninstaller. You can go ahead and do that. I usually leave those other options unchecked, but that's the things you all have probably encountered before. You go down and install a piece of software, and then when it uninstalls, it jumps over to a web page. It's like, please take our survey saying why you uninstalled it. Those feedbacks are, that's what those other checkboxes are. You can set up some custom variables if you think you're going to need them. Things like, well, our software depends on another file, so it might not hurt to have that as a variable here. That could be useful, but already put that in the thing. Any custom command prompts. The big one here is files, because obviously we need our files. And probably click uninstaller. Again, just to fit that normal way of doing things instead of going through and manually deleting all the files. Information about splash screen. If things are going to splash screens are those little graphics that pop up, like if something's going to take a long time to load, maybe we expect we're going to have window, we're going to have to download a great big huge thing. Like we're going to have to go over to the internet and grab embedded Python, install that on the machine, make our software run. And we know that's going to take a couple seconds, so we could just flash a picture up there to pass the time for that couple seconds. That's what a splash screen is. Licensing, you can put whatever you want here, put license here. And if you checking the box here means the user has to agree to it. Be that normal thing, do you agree to this? I'll just say use at own risk. This was created for a classroom example. It is not thoroughly tested software. Just in case anybody ever comes across this, that way they'll see that message. A short enough user agreement, they'll probably read it. But in general, what you would do is what I usually do is when we create a new repository on GitHub, we have these options to generate some of the standard licensing, the standard open source licensing, or there's you can find some public non-open source ones labeled as proprietary, nice fancy things written up by a lawyer that are ready to copy and paste, or some of the proprietary ones you might have to pay a little bit for. But when we create a new repository where we're going to keep it, one of the things we can do is initialize it with a license. So then it's just then we can just copy and paste that license in here, and we have like the normal Apache license or the normal MIT license. Validation is just sort of confirmation things. We don't need that. Finish. Again, run an application, reboot. Those are options that show up on the wizard. It's not, if we click this box here, that's not going to automatically run the application when the wizard's finished. That's going to give the user that just ran the installer the option to run the application. So clicking this checkbox just puts a checkbox on that other, puts a checkbox on the wizard. I'll just leave it finish there. So main one, there's the license, because you probably want that, the normal indemnity things. And under system, oops, backlaps. If you have to do anything with the registry, like if your thing needs to add some registry keys, you want to put them in here. Shortcuts you probably want, because we're likely want two of them. Probably want to at least give the user the option for a desktop shortcut. Call it example software. And it's going to go to the install path, which, come back up here and you notice install path is all of this. And then it's going to copy this folder in. So you can probably make that shorter. So it's going to go all of this and then copy in this software folder. So when we go to shortcuts, add a desktop shortcut, example software. It's going to go to the install path and then a folder called software that we're copying in. How did I name that? With a lowercase s. And then we want to run that batch file. So into software, and then what we actually want to run is software.bat. So we need to point right to that file. Any arguments if you need those, and if you need an icon, you want to point to that as well, which is basically the same spot. But we have that, I think we can use the pin here. Or I'll use the icon. Icon.ico. So make sure you actually point to the files that you want to go to. Remember, the install path is where the stuff we said the copy and paste is going. We probably want a start menu shortcut, start menu as well. Example software. You can go to the install path, software folder, and then run software batch file. I'll copy all that because the icon is in almost the same spot. I think we actually might need the ping file for this. We'll see if this works. I'm gonna switch that to the ping. There's probably a couple little issues might have to come back and adjust. I haven't done this in a while. I always change this. So this right here is putting those into folders on the start menu. And I don't really like that. So I usually go ahead and take that out. If you have a preference to have those nice organized folders in the start menu, you can set it up there. That's what this box is for. Let users change it. Great for all users, great desktops. And then once again, these checkboxes are checking them here, puts the checkbox for the user to click on when they run the installer. Which gets us all the way down to the last steps of build. And let's say where we're going to build it at. So I'll navigate somewhere. I'll put it in the same folder. Notice it's an exe folder, so I'll call it example software installer .exe. So when we create that file, got our icons for it. It's using the default icon, so I'll just go with that. And I'm going to hit save so we don't have to do all that stuff again. Installer setup. Just in case we have to do all that again. And when we're ready, there's this big gear button up here that says build. So after, and many times, I don't know why I have forgotten this one. Or I go in there and try to just manually type the name in there. I've done that a number of times. So make sure you use the browse button and actually direct it to a specific folder. When you're ready, just hit build. And you all know how quickly computers write text files. This is writing a text file. This is writing several text files and putting them into zip folder, along with copying those 5 files in that folder that I had. And you don't know how long it takes to copy 5 files and write a bunch of text files. And it took that long. So that'll give you some idea of how long it takes to type up all those instructions manually. Otherwise, it's just a batch file. You just have to type a bunch of instructions, but the amount of time it just took a computer to write those. You saw how the amount of time it took a computer to write those. So you can probably get a pretty good idea of how long it would take you to write those files. A lot easier to have the software do it. And they're all pretty much equivalent. The GUIs might be laid out slightly differently, but they're all about the same. Then just click on the installer. Yes, want to run it. And there's our little wizard. They got rid of Shake too. I don't know why they did that. There were a number of decisions for Windows 11 that I didn't particularly care with. Shake was great where we would just shake a window and everything else would go away. So you can see there's the picture we said to load. It will install this on the computer, some other stuff. There's the license. Have to agree to it. I mean, that checkbox shows the license and then it's a license page. So if the license is showing, you have to agree to it. But probably the best thing to do there is copy one of the standard ones, Apache, GNU, or MIT, or what I usually use. Just copy those from a GitHub repository. Next, here's where it's going to install. Have the option to change it, size and all that. Sure, I'll go ahead and leave both of those checked this time. Next. And finish. Oh, transparency would be nice. I just drew that really quick in Microsoft Paint. So normally we would have transparent icons and stuff, but let's give it a try. There we go. So that installed or made that normal installer to put on your computer. Hello world, hit the enter key to exit. And it's installed, and I forgot to look, I think program files x86. Yep, must be program files x86. Yes, so I put the company name as me. Go in here. There's the software. So that data file that our software depends on is over here in program files x86, which y'all are well aware of. That if I hit the delete button here, we have to pass on administrator privileges. We have to have administrator privileges to delete the file here, which makes that a little bit safer. But the normal installer, the biggest thing there is that it matches our users' expectations for what they would get. And if they don't want it, we also have the start menu one. I guess so, like the way the default games are put in a folder. That was that thing I pointed out where there was some looked like a directory structure. There when we set up the shortcuts, that puts those folders into the start menu. So I usually get rid of those. So ours should be down here under E, right? There it is. Forgot what I called it for a moment. And we can start it from here as well. And there's our fairly trivial example tonight, but it's still there. it is technically a piece of software that does run. Oops. And when it went to the desktop, focus was still on the desktop icon. That's why it opened twice there. If anybody was wondering about that. Because this one was highlighted, but then I ran it from over here. So when it didn't do it that time. I must have bumped it with my mouse. But we went back to the desktop and just the enter key started at that time. And we chose to set up an uninstaller. So is that still in the control panel? Okay, yeah, nice. So over in the uninstaller, there's once again matching user expectations. If they want to get rid of it, they don't have to go delete all those files. They can just run an uninstaller here. Get all that, and you can see it's cleared from the computer. I'll go ahead and point this out. Since it put it in x80 program files x86, it can empty all of the folders, but it can't automatically clear out that top level folder. You've probably experienced that before over time if you have a Windows machine. As you install and uninstall software, you end up with a bunch of empty folders and program files x86, because it can't do that final install, or it can't do that final top level folder. You have to manually delete that one. But that's something about Windows. So that's how we make those installers. I've been using InstallForge for I think my last 3 laptops. They're all about the same. You can try out different ones, see which ones you like, but they basically do the same thing. And as such, they require those same things be fed into them. That's how we make it, is what we do when we're finished with it. In Python, one of the big things about Python is it's cross-platform. So you might want to do this on other machines as well. Oh, I got the MacBook out. I probably should have logged on to the Zoom call already, or at least started Zoom on it. Join the meeting. This one. Oh, am I signed in on that machine? I probably am. So on the Windows installers, on the camera, it's a weird angle too. On the Windows installers, I don't have any sort of preference, but for Macs, I definitely do. This thing here, packages, you can get it from the Apple Store. The installer, they do have to be made on the appropriate system. So to make a Windows installer, you need to make that on a Windows machine. To make a Mac installer, you need to make that on a Mac. To make a Linux installer, you need to make that on Linux. Linux users want the source code, but there are some that exist. So you do have to make your installer on the appropriate type of system. But on Windows, this thing packages, you can just grab it from the App Store, just create a new distribution package, give it a name. Sure, forget that. And once again, it's just a big graphical user interface to go through and set up that fancy copy and paste that we know as an installer. And that way your users are familiar with it. So there's several on a Mac, but this one, there's one on the App Store called Packages that creates the .pkg installers as opposed to the disk image. There's no shortage of software that creates the disk image. If you would prefer those, you search the Apple Store for that as well. But packages is really nice for the .pkg ones. And like I said, Linux users want your tar files, but what I usually do is a deb file. One of our types of installers. And I really only do create that. Not thinking people are going to use that to install on a Linux machine. It's just a little flag, waving a flag at the Linux users to be like, hey, this was tested on Linux. So they're going to go to GitHub and down there. So you probably want to do a package file, but then also do a regular tar zip of the of all the configuration ones. I can jump over to GitHub and look at one of these. So I don't have very many of these on GitHub. Usually when something's finished, I move it off GitHub. Okay, so yeah, here's the little software I keep around for my accounting, keeping track of my personal finances. So the custom accounting software I wanted. Some accounting software is just so complicated and confusing to use, and they automated things that I didn't think should be automated, and got rid of some features that are traditional in standard accounting. So I just made my own software for it. Is what this is. But in here somewhere, yeah, so there's a bat file, the batch file to launch it on Windows, but there's an equivalent one, a .sh, so the shell script for a Linux one, and a .zsh, which is a shell script for a Mac. So whether they've done the latest update or not on their Mac, one of those shell scripts should work on their Mac. And under installers, the PKG file for a Mac, .exe for Windows, and then a .deb file, a Debian file, just one of the installers we have for Linux. But again, Linux users want the source code. That's a big thing about using Linux to have the thing in here. Oh, maybe it isn't it. That's, and actually the dev one, I was going to open that up because the other day, remember we looked at the TOML files for our Python package manifest that Pip and Anaconda would use. And once we have those, then our stuff's ready to for Pip or Anaconda to use. People can download a Pip install git plus git, and then the GitHub repository and grab it from GitHub, or whichever repository. It isn't always git plus URL to the repository, because git is the actual command line instruction for that. GitHub just took advantage of that. So they can grab it right from there, or we can go, once we have that manifest stuff together, go tell, I always say the word wrong, Pi people is how I want to say it, but PYPL. I think we're supposed to pronounce it with like people, only with pi instead, but it jumbles up my tongue, so I always just go ahead and say Pi people. I think it's supposed to be people or something like that. However we pronounce it, the place that it normally goes and looks first. And I think Anaconda does too. Oh, not that. I'll do this. We grabbed this. Well, we grabbed this one the other day. These people, or Pi, I guess this isn't. There's several of them. You can tell one of these groups about your stuff, and then they'll set it up on their page. They'll run it through their automatic testing software, and if they like your package, they'll just add it to the thing. The free open source stuff. And if they don't just reject it. They'll tell you what they would want you to, what they want you to fix before they're like, oh, we hit it. Our automatic testing software saw a problem. Please fix this first. So you reach out to them to get, you have to reach out to them to get that last step where you can just say pip install and then the name of the software. You have to contact one of those groups and then they run it through their automatic testing stuff. And then a human manually runs it. A human manually tests it. And if it doesn't pass any of the tests, they will send you a list of things to fix on it and then test it again. Signatures, those things will also often make your those things will also often make antivirus software go nuts if it's not signed. You have to buy it. You have to pay for a signature. That's how you get around those. Search for digital certificate, and you have to buy one. And in most cases, antivirus software will still probably freak out over your digital certificate for 2 or 3 years before it's been reported to the database enough that somebody finally bothers to look at it and a human actually clicks approve on your certificate. That can stretch out for a while, but you have to pay for one. Yeah, that's just something. Just search digital certificate, and then there's lots and lots of places to buy them. And then in a couple of years, after you buy a couple of digital certificate, the antivirus software will eventually stop freaking out about software that you wrote. But again, that is those last steps, like reporting it to by people or by or getting antivirus software to know your to recognize your to recognize you and the software that you wrote. That's waiting on other people. There's not much we can do about it. What we can do is put our installers together and get it started so that the rest of that waiting on other people stuff can move through the chain. But that's the steps for an installer. For both kinds, we looked at finish out the manifest, and as far as a package, that's the last part on a package. We just leave that manifest there on our repository or wherever that's stored. And when a programmer goes to import that package or install that package so that they can import it into their scripts, then the pip or Anaconda or one of the other Python installers handles the rest once we have the manifest together. And then the other ones for end user installations, just walk through one of those GUIs, search around. I always recommend checking those best of lists and read the blog. That gives you a good idea of what you should be looking for in that type of software. But they all seem very, very, very similar. It's one of those things where it really seems like whenever somebody would go to make a new one, they looked at somebody else's and just made a copy of it. So all of them are almost identical. Buttons are moved around to a different place and they chose different color schemes. It's about the only difference. Anybody have any questions about that stuff? It's fairly straightforward, fairly easy to use. You just want to, like always, select a subject. We learn by doing, so you'll just want to make a couple installers and choose different options on whichever one you choose. I've been using InstallForge for like 3 laptops now. I've been fairly happy with it. There's some features I would like to see or different organizations, but I haven't really found one that I like better, and it doesn't bother me to the point that accounting software does, that I'm going to turn around and make my own, like I do for accounting software or project management software. This project management software I use in the classroom when I'm getting my lectures ready. I like to plan things out using project management software and Gantt charts, and I use the cost basis not as money, but I use that to graph and chart things on difficulty levels. That way we're not constantly like getting more difficult. It's like a back and forth and balance out and stuff. I like those features when I plan out my lectures and courses. But project management software usually goes for the week or the month. It's rare to even, a lot of times you can't even get project management software to work by the day. So when I needed something that I wanted to go down to the minute, I had to make my own. But we're software developers, we can make our own too. You can look at some of the different ones and be like, yeah, I don't like any of these, and just get started on making your own. And looking at what it takes to a little deeper, what that software is doing in the background to make those installers. Just copy and paste and create a bunch of shortcuts. Those are very simple command prompt instructions, but there's lots of them. Okay, I assume nobody has any questions there. Nothing's popped up in the chat room. Nobody's unmuted since I asked that. So that was what I had on tap for this evening. The semester ends on Tuesday, 11:59. So our class, we'll still have class on Tuesday just to kind of look at some odds and ends, things that'll be useful for you. Because 16 weeks, there's still a lot of things about Python we can talk about. So I'll have a couple odds and ends to finish it out, but probably about 45 minutes worth for the last day there. So if there's no questions, I guess that's it for this evening. You all have a great weekend. And remember the Tech Club here at Sellersburg is having a game jam event that is both virtual and on campus. If you come to campus, there's pizza. Otherwise, you all have a great weekend. I will see you on Thursday. Oh, question. Are you going to share our final projects? Like a discussion board? If you want, I will go create a discussion board right now so you can share that. You can share the final projects with each other. Because yeah, after working hard on it, that is a great question, Mark. After working hard on it, you probably want somebody other than me to see it, right? So I will create a discussion board as soon as our session here ends, so that you can share those with each other and kind of show off what you did with your classmates. Y'all have a great weekend. I'll see you on Tuesday.